I suffer from anxiety. I suffer from specific phobias, and I also am a recovered addict. I had a drug and alcohol addiction for quite a few years during my 20s when I first started suffering from my anxiety problems. A lot of that came into play because I was terrified of myself. I was terrified of what I was going through. I was terrified of what my body was going through. And I realized that when I would go out with some of my friends sometimes who liked to party and drink, I would start having drinks here and there, and I never was a drinker before that. And once I started, it would start with one drink, and then it would start with 2 drinks, you know, and each time it got progressively more and more until I realized that I was becoming extremely intoxicated a lot. And it got to the point where I was basically intoxicated for most of my days. I think maybe I would sober up just long enough to maybe take a shower, and if I was lucky to have one meal. Drugs came into play at one point as well. I was just so desperate to not care. The addiction really took hold with my anxiety when I realized that the more I drank, the more I abused drugs, the less I cared. And the less I cared, the more relief I think I felt. But it was a false sense of relief, because once you sober up, once you don't have that substance clouding your mind, all of your anxieties, all of your fears, everything is still right there. And a lot of times once you sober up, it's tenfold. So you find yourself drinking more or using more drugs to continually numb yourself to the point where it becomes a huge problem and you really don't know how to function without the alcohol or the drugs. I got out of my addiction when I found myself sitting on the concrete floor, freezing cold, of the Clark County Jail in Las Vegas. I have little memory of really what happened and how I got there. I just know that once I realized that I'm in jail and I'm sitting on the floor and I'm freezing cold and I'm in nothing but this little jumpsuit that might as well be a burlap sack, with none of my possessions, with nothing to my name. I think that's when I realized I need help. I had been pulled over for drunk driving, and I ended up with a DUI, which I was lucky that the charge got dropped, because by the time they got me booked and got me in there, my blood alcohol level was just barely there at the legal limit. So thinking about that and realizing that even though I wasn't driving as drunk as I could have been that night, it doesn't excuse it, and there could have been a time where I was driving even more intoxicated and I could have killed myself, or worse, somebody else. And that was a huge wake-up call for me, that I really needed to straighten up my life and make a huge turnaround. Once my addiction got a hold of me to the point where I realized I needed to get out of it, I made a big change in my life. I actually realized that I needed to kind of start all over again, like from rock bottom. Rock bottom for me was sitting on that jail cell floor and not knowing when I was going to get out of jail, what I was going to be charged with. And so once I got all that behind me, I realized I need to start over. I need to make a brand new life for myself. I moved from Las Vegas, Nevada, up here to Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, a small town that I know nothing about, that I don't even know how to live small town life, but it made a world of difference. I met new people out here, and the more I got to know people, the more I realized that it was okay to talk about my problems, to talk about my past addictions, and to talk about my anxieties. And to have people that don't judge is priceless. There is an absolute hand-in-hand phenomenon with addiction and my anxiety. Even to this day, I have to be really careful with what I surround myself with and who I surround myself with, because they say once an addict, always an addict. And I believe that's true in a sense. I don't like myself to put a stigma on addiction, but I think once you realize that you have become addicted to something, it would be really easy to fall back into that trap. When I think back about all the times that I was coming off of drugs, or that I had to sleep off mass amounts of alcohol, and how I felt, nothing could ever make me go back to that feeling, to just feel like you're living in a nightmare. I mean, you're living in a nightmare with anxiety anyways, but addiction can just make it 10 times worse.
Substance abuse is considered a mental illness. It is in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual 5 that we operate from right now in the mental health arena. It is considered an illness, just like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. It is labeled as such. And there are certain criteria that have to be met for diagnosis of a substance abuse disorder. And it can be alcohol, it can be stimulant, it can be depressant use. They all have different subcategories of diagnosis within the mental health disorders. So mental health and mental illness are often correlated to addiction. And so there may have been an experience in an individual's life or a traumatic event that may create some symptoms of mental illness, whether it be depressive symptoms, anxious symptoms, trauma symptoms, reactions, the body's reaction to an environment or a specific situation that happened. And as a way to deal with the stress that the body might be feeling or that the mind might be feeling, substance use can come into play. And substance use can be a way of coping with or minimizing what we might be thinking or feeling. And so people begin to use substances to quiet or shut down the feelings or the emotions or that might be happening as a result of something that may have happened to them. So there are chemical imbalances that happen then in the brain when we start adding substances. And then the brain and the body becomes dependent on those substances in order to function. And so for people that have been using substances for a particular point for a longevity, what happens is they quit giving that to the body, and the body and mind physically react, which creates oftentimes a feeling of sickness. And so the only way to help that sickness go away is to again use some type of substance to calm that. And so even though they may have never started out wanting to have addiction or substance use as part of their life, their body and their mind becomes dependent on it. And then what happens oftentimes is there's guilt and shame from the substance use, which also contributes to the pre-existing or some of the mental health symptoms that are going together. And so there's really a connectedness between mental illness and substance abuse for many people. They often have what we call in mental health a dual diagnosis, substance use and mental illness that work collectively together. A dual diagnosis is an individual who suffers from mental illness or symptoms of mental illness and has substance use concerns at the same time. And oftentimes they are very interrelated, and so one might contribute to the other, oftentimes they do, and that when we work with healing individuals, that we can't heal them isolative of the other. So having treatment centers or treatment programs that address both mental illness and substance abuse at the same time are essential. So you could be talking to your individual counselor or individual therapist at the same time you're participating in some type of recovery program or healing from substance abuse, that there's a connection connectedness amongst them. There is also a genetic component of mental illness. It doesn't necessarily mean that there was some specific event or situation that creates depression or anxiety. We can often inherit, as we would say, some of those tendencies in our chemical makeup through our DNA to have depressive-like symptoms. And so it might be feelings of just feeling down or feeling hopeless or feeling worried, and that it may not be from an environmental stressor at all, but just the way that our body is made up. And so in healing those types of things, we want to be looking at what are skills that we can learn as individuals that help us to move through that uncomfortableness until we feel a piece of some peace or serenity that comes to us. That comes through for many different people in different ways. So it might be physical activity, going for walks. It might be thinking activities, taking meditation. It might be breathing. It might be journaling. It might be all kinds of different skills that we can learn to kind of counterbalance some of that depression and anxiety that we might feel. So sometimes people do not reach out for support because they feel that there's stigma associated with it. And there has been. You know, traditionally people who sought out mental health supports were often viewed as somebody who might be crazy or who can't manage their life. And what we're realizing through research now is that everybody has their own sets of challenges. We all have our own corners, if you would call them that we have to kind of get around and navigate. It may not be something that everyone sees, but we all feel it. And the stigma around it can make us feel very isolated. Like, I'm the only one. Everybody else appears to be doing very well. Why am I the only one struggling? And I think even in today's world of social media, there's a projection of what we post, we always look our best. We never really see the whole truth of the person. And so there's a stigma about ever saying I don't feel well or I'm not doing very well because I want everybody to believe that I am. And it's not understood by our family members sometimes. They don't understand what we're going through. And so reaching out to people that do understand what mental health is and substance abuse concerns are is really essential. And that sometimes even our family is not our best support system, because of some of the things that may have happened into our past, and that we need to reach out to the people that can take a neutral stance and that really want to have our best interests at heart and listen to us. And it really is about approaches that are strength-based and client-driven. So somebody telling you what you should do is not going to be as well received as if you say what you need, and you can communicate that. And that takes some practice to do, to be able to slow down, to listen to what your body is saying, to listen to what your heart is saying, and then being able to share that with someone else. One of the most important things that we can do when addressing substance abuse and mental health concerns is to talk about it. We can't pretend that it's not happening, because then the individual does not get the supports that they need. And community members and family members, talking about that amongst yourself. We often fear it's only us, but the reality is other people are experiencing it too, and being open and honest and trustworthy and unashamed of the experience is essential in helping individuals access the supports they need. I would talk about substance abuse treatment when you start to notice that there's different elements of the individual's lives that are being impacted by their substance use. And so it might be relationships with family members. It might be that they're missing work or late for work. It might be that their financial resources are being depleted because of their substance use. So just being aware of kind of the environmental or the different facets of the individual's life would make you aware of how and if you would approach substance abuse treatment for the individual. And a treatment looks different for each person. So a person might, the initial approach to getting into treatment is to do a comprehensive assessment, which looks at all of the different aspects of the individual's life. And from the assessment, the substance abuse assessor will make recommendations on what they believe would be the best therapeutic approach for the individual. It might be inpatient treatment, it might be outpatient treatment, it might be a support group, it might be finding a sponsor. So every individual's needs vary based on the assessment and the assessor's recommendations for the individual. And that as an individual, you get to reflect on which treatment option best meets your needs and talk about that with your assessor and the treatment program that you're going to be entering. Avoiding mental health or substance use concerns aren't going to make them go away. As an individual who lives in a family or is connected to someone who is struggling, we see the behavior. And so it's important that we approach that individual from a place of love and respect and the desire for them to get well. And that our anger is about the behavior that happens. And so being really careful that we separate the behavior from the individual, and that the only way that oftentimes people will hear us is if they feel loved by us and respected by us. And so coming at them always from that perspective would be essential. If you're finding that the times you approach the individual there's a lot of resistance, there's probably a lot of history and hurt that has happened. And so you might be spinning your wheels if you continue to try to approach them about that situation. Talking to one of their friends or one of their supports or somebody else, you know, we often hear, and we're just often like children, so we'll behave better for other people than we will for the people that we love and that support us every single day. It's the same way with people who are struggling with their addiction or mental health, that if a neutral person or somebody that they care about who is not frustrated and angry brings up or broaches the topic, there's often a better response from the individual. And so your role might just be to connect them to someone that they do trust or are willing to establish trust with. That you stepping back would be important for their success because it is their journey, it's their healing. They may enter treatment because they want their family unity together, and eventually that'll happen, and so will their own issues be addressed. So we enter treatment for all kinds of different reasons, but the outcome is the success of the whole family structure and the individual themselves. You can address an individual who is experiencing, or in your perception, might be experiencing substance use concerns with a straightforward question. Is there anything that I can do to help you? You can also provide them with a simple crisis line hotline if you wanted to. You can ask them specifically, have you noticed, has anything changed in your life? I'm worried about you. It seems like your behavior has changed some. What is happening with you? You don't even have to talk about the substance use specifically if you choose not to, but being involved and asking questions that are getting at what might be the root of what is happening. So change comes within the individual. We can't make them change. They have to be willing to be open to it. And so we're just asking about their interest. We're asking about their involvement. We're making some observations maybe that I haven't seen you. I'm wondering where you've been. That it's those kinds of background suggestions that may get the individual to talk about the substance use or maybe not. And that varies by individual in their level of trust with you and whether they confide in with you what is really happening. But if you want to talk to them about how they're doing without specifically talking about either their mental illness or their substance abuse, you can talk to them about what have they been doing over the last week. You know, where have they gone? Who have they spent time with? Did they go to the mountain? Did they go out for, you know, a walk with their friend? Because those are all indicators. The engagement with other people are often indicators of how well the individual is doing. In treatment, we want to address the whole person. We want to look at all of their needs. So how are they doing physically? How are they doing mentally? How are they doing with their emotions? And how are they doing spiritually? That we can't divide an individual up and only treat one part of it. In order to be comprehensive in the work that we need to do holistic treatment. And that may be things like physical health. How are they doing? When's the last time they've been to their doctor? Have they had their blood pressure checked? Have they had their blood sugar checked? You know, all of those kinds of things that impact. Physical health is part of healing. We can't not address that. How are they doing spiritually? If they have a spiritual connection to something, are they actively engaged in that? And it may not be going to church or attending or organized event, but spiritually, are they connecting with something? Do they have that connection? Emotionally, how are their emotions? Are we only seeing the emotion of anger? Are we only seeing the emotion of disappointment? Are we only seeing the emotion of worry? You know, are our emotions balanced? Are we looking at all of them? And then mentally, what are our thoughts? Do our thoughts are they consumed by negative thoughts? You know, this is going wrong, that's going wrong, this is another issue that happened today, and here, you know, when we begin to ruminate on the positive, instead of also looking at what are our positive thoughts. It's a nice day today. I looked well, I'm having a good hair day, you know, the sun is shining. And so looking at all of those components of an individual when we look at healing for them. They're not inseparable, that they have to be connected. It's important, I think, to recognize that individuals all have their own unique cultural background. And practicing or having elements of your cultural background, whether you're Finnish, German, Native American, Norwegian, Hispanic, all of them, there's unique supports that are built into those structures. And accessing your cultural heritage can help you heal holistically, because we can't often separate who we are. So when we look at people, we want to look at them in a holistic way. What is their culture? What is their spiritual identity? How is their physical health impacting what's going on? How is their mental health impacting, and their emotional health? So we look at an individual as a whole entity and not compartmentalize only the substance abuse or compartmentalize only the mental illness, but the whole person. How are they engaging in their community and being well? I'm also thinking about the connection between addiction and mental health in terms of like the medical assisted treatments that are out there for individuals. And so there are medications that can help an individual who may be struggling specifically with substance abuse to help curb some of those cravings. And talking to your doctor, consulting with your physician, or a medically assisted treatment program is essential for success too, especially if you're concerned about withdrawal or your body's reaction to not having the chemical like we talked about in the past. Usually when they're in recovery, they've gone through a recovery environment, whether that be a treatment where they're looking at their substance use, whether it's been through individual treatment or group substance abuse treatment. And they have a group of healthy people oftentimes around them, their counselors, their peers that have gone through treatment with them. And staying engaged with those people is really essential to their continued and ongoing success. It's when the isolation starts happening and people step away from their supports that relapse often happens. So staying engaged with your support system is one of the biggest things that you can do in terms of staying healthy. Knowing what your depressive thoughts look like or your anxious thoughts look like, being aware of what triggers you. That is something that is often identified in treatment, is like you look at the triggers. And so when something is triggering you, how are you reacting to it? What are you needing to do? What kind of supports are you needing to reach out to? Is there a sponsor? Is there a coach? Is there somebody in your life that you trust that you can say, I'm really struggling with this and I don't want to go back to where I was. I don't want to feel like I've gone back to base zero, but I maybe had a slip, or maybe I've had an issue with my mental health where I've been depressed and haven't been able to get out of my house for a couple of days. But I'm aware of that. And who do I support that I can trust to reach out to help me reintegrate into the healing support system that I need to have around me? So your support system might be for anybody, from any simplest, maybe it could be your barber, it could be somebody that lifts you up even when you go through the checkout line or that you enjoy seeing in a retail store. It could be a formal support, it might be an AA sponsor or an NA sponsor, it might be a mental health therapist, it could be your primary care doctor. The supports around you, they could be an aunt, it could be an uncle, it could be somebody that's really close or related. So every support varies based on the individual's needs, but the individual can usually tell at least one person that they have a trusting relationship with, that they would be willing to talk with about their concerns. When somebody is going through treatment and you want to support them but you're unsure how, one of the things that you can do is ask them directly, how are they doing? How are things going with their mental health? How are things going with their substance use? It might be that they're tired of you asking them that specific question. It might be they want to know how much progress they're making on a car they've been reassembling. Or it might be, how are you doing in terms of meeting your goals of getting out and walking every day? So it might be even just asking, what are your goals? And then you focus your conversation around what that individual has for interests and or sharing your own interests, so that the conversation is not always about the substance use or the mental health disorder, but how are we doing with activities in our lives that both interest us. There's a big fear about bringing up the subject of substance use, but as a family or a support system, you can make a choice to not have substances at family events. That's supportive of the individual. You can be aware of where you hold specific family events. That's also supportive of the individual. So just kind of thinking about, oftentimes it's a reflection of what would I need if I were in that situation, can help you to guide your interactions in supporting the person who may be struggling with substance abuse addiction. So there may be several different experiences that you may recognize that you're not doing very well. It might be, yes, you might be having some negative thoughts. It might be those ruminating thoughts that come back and back and back. You try to let them go and they surface again. It might be your inability to focus at work or at school. It might be your inability to care for yourself. So maybe there isn't the hygiene issues that are going on. Maybe you haven't showered. It might be the isolation piece, maybe not leaving your home. So all of those are symptoms or suggestions that something might be slipping back into depression, anxiety, or substance use for you. And so just to kind of, you really have to be very self-aware of what is happening to you in order to catch yourself early on. And when you feel that way, it's important to reach out to the people that you've grown to love and that you know who support you. The piece of advice that I would give to a family member or friend is to approach the individual who is struggling with addiction from a loving place, from a loving, concerned place. that all of the behaviors, all of the things that happened in the past no longer can impact what the future will be if we don't allow it to. So coming from a fresh start, taking the love and the concern that you have for the individual and wanting to just start over. And sometimes it means letting go of the past hurts that we've had, the past memories, all of those kinds of things in order for us to heal fully. Because an individual heals through treatment, but how does the family heal through treatment? Oftentimes the individual wants to change, but the family's behavior or responses are often the same. And so the family needs healing as well as the individual. And so looking at it as a collective component would be essential for the family and the individual's success. The advice that I would give to a person who is struggling with addiction is to recognize that they are not alone in their struggle. That reaching out to other people and other supports will help them find a community of people who have similar concerns. And that to be able to isolate continues and perpetuates the problem. But reaching out to someone can really bring some relief and some connection, which is what we desire probably in our work and in our experience. There is healing for and hope for people who are struggling with substance abuse. We have multiple programs in our communities that are very successful in creating longevity of sobriety for many people. And just because you have a slip or a relapse, that doesn't mean that all of the work that you put into your sobriety goes back to zero. You have the ability to start where you left off and pick up and go forward. One of the resources that we have in our community is the 24-hour crisis line. And that's a collaborative approach amongst many agencies for individuals. And it is answered 24/7, so any time of day you call, you will get somebody on the other line. They will come out and they will sit with you if you need be. They will come out and start an assessment process if need be. But they are available to us 24/7. And the crisis is determined by the individual, not by the crisis support people. So what might be crisis to you may not be crisis to me, but that doesn't mean that the crisis is not valid. And so it stretches beyond suicide, but any type of mental health crisis that you or your family member might be going through, we can reach out to that 24-hour crisis support line.